Get up, you street parasite, before I haul you in like trash. Officer Rourke's boot pressed down on Isaiah Boone's cardboard, slowly grinding his only blanket into the concrete as he stood over him, blocking out the morning light. The metal cuffs at his belt gave a sharp, deliberate clink as his hand rested near them. "You think this sidewalk is your living room?" he said, voice loud and cutting for the growing crowd, his breath carrying the bitter edge of coffee and authority. Isaiah didn't move, his worn hands resting calmly on his knees, his gaze steady, despite the weight of humiliation settling around him. A few feet away, a well-dressed older man paused, watching in silence. Rourke leaned in slightly, voice lowering into something colder. "Last chance. Move, or I'll make you disappear." He had no idea the man behind him had the power to end his career before the day was over. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty sidewalk as Isaiah Boone sat quietly on his flattened cardboard. The paper bag in his weathered hands contained a day-old sandwich from the church outreach program. Each careful bite was measured, deliberate, a habit formed from years of making every meal count. The storefront behind him had been vacant for months, its windows papered over with "coming soon" signs. Isaiah knew the neighborhood was changing. He'd seen it happen before, block by block, pushing people like him further into the shadows. The sandwich wasn't much, but it was breakfast. Isaiah chewed slowly, watching early commuters hurry past without meeting his eyes. His possessions, a worn backpack, a rolled sleeping bag, and 2 plastic bags containing everything he owned, were neatly arranged beside him, taking up as little space as possible. Officer Daniel Rourke's heavy footsteps announced his presence before Isaiah saw him. The cop's polished boots stopped directly in front of the cardboard, casting a deliberate shadow over Isaiah's meal. "Time to move along," Rourke announced, his voice carrying the artificial authority of someone who enjoyed wielding power. "Can't have you camping out here." Isaiah swallowed his bite of sandwich, keeping his eyes lowered. "Good morning, officer," he said quietly. "I'm not blocking anyone's path. Just having my breakfast." Rourke's jaw tightened. "Did I ask what you were doing? This area's getting cleaned up. Developers meeting here in an hour. Can't have you making the place look bad." "I'll be done eating soon," Isaiah replied, his voice steady despite the familiar tightness growing in his chest. "There's nowhere else nearby that's sheltered." "Not my problem," Rourke snapped. His boot connected with Isaiah's backpack, knocking it over. "Move! Now!" A few pedestrians slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold. Isaiah felt their eyes on him, some curious, others uncomfortable, most simply looking away. His cheeks burned with humiliation, but he kept his voice level. "Please, officer, I'm not causing any trouble. Just let me finish my meal." Rourke's face reddened. He kicked the backpack again, harder this time, sending it skidding across the sidewalk. Its contents spilled out: a few pieces of clothing, a worn Bible, some toilet paper, and basic toiletries. Each item that scattered across the concrete represented another small indignity. "You deaf?" Rourke demanded, voice rising. "This isn't a soup kitchen. This is private property." "The building's empty," Isaiah said, carefully placing his sandwich back in the paper bag. "Has been for months." "Oh, so you're a real estate expert now?" Rourke's laugh was sharp, meant to cut. He turned to the growing crowd of onlookers. "You hearing this? The bum thinks he knows property law." Isaiah's hands trembled slightly as he began gathering his scattered belongings. Not from fear. He'd dealt with officers like Rourke before, but from the effort of containing his anger, his frustration, his exhaustion with being treated as less than human. 20 years as a city inspector, Isaiah said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Before that, I served—" "I don't care if you were the president," Rourke interrupted, taking an aggressive step closer. "Right now, you're nothing but a nuisance." "And nuisances get removed." A woman walking past quickened her steps. A man in a business suit pretended to be deeply absorbed in his phone. No one wanted to see this, to acknowledge what was happening in broad daylight on their clean, gentrifying street. Isaiah carefully folded his cardboard, movements deliberate and dignified, despite Rourke's looming presence. He'd learned long ago that sudden movements around angry officers only made things worse. "Some of us still have real jobs to do," Rourke continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "Can't spend all day arguing with sidewalk campers who think they have rights." Isaiah stood slowly, his knees protesting the movement. At his full height, he was eye-level with Rourke, but he kept his posture non-threatening, shoulders slightly hunched, hands visible. "I know my rights, officer," he said softly. "I'm not breaking any laws." "Is that right?" Rourke's hand dropped to his belt, fingers drumming near his handcuffs. "Because I'm pretty sure I can find half a dozen violations right now. Loitering, trespassing, public nuisance. Take your pick." More people had gathered at the edges of the scene, their presence both witness and weight. Isaiah felt the familiar pressure of their stares, the silent judgment, the relief that they weren't in his position. Rourke leaned in close, his breath hot and aggressive. "Leave," he said, voice sharp and loud enough for everyone to hear, "or I'll arrest you." Isaiah looked up, meeting Rourke's gaze. His eyes were tired but steady, carrying the weight of countless similar confrontations, countless moments of being treated as invisible until he became an inconvenience to be removed. The tension hung heavy in the morning air as Isaiah stood motionless, his belongings scattered across the concrete like broken pieces of his dignity. Officer Rourke's presence seemed to expand, filling the space between them with unspoken threats and barely contained anger. A distinguished figure approached from the direction of the courthouse, his measured stride and formal attire marking him as someone of authority. Judge Nathaniel Price had been walking to a downtown civic meeting when the scene caught his attention. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an air of quiet wisdom, and his dark suit spoke of someone who understood the weight of authority. Real authority, not the kind that needed to be proven with force. The judge paused at the edge of the growing crowd, observing. His eyes took in every detail: the scattered belongings, Isaiah's careful stillness, Rourke's aggressive posture. He watched as Rourke continued to loom over Isaiah, the officer's hand still hovering near his handcuffs. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Judge Price's voice cut through the tension, calm but carrying the natural authority of decades on the bench. Rourke's head snapped around, his expression shifting as he registered the judge's presence. His posture straightened automatically, some of the aggressive edge bleeding away. "No problem, Your Honor. Just moving along someone who's camping illegally." "I see," the judge said, stepping closer. His shoes made soft clicking sounds against the sidewalk as he approached. "And which ordinance specifically prohibits sitting on this particular stretch of sidewalk at this hour?" Isaiah remained silent, his eyes moving between the two men. His hands were clasped in front of him, steady now, watching as someone with real power asked the questions he couldn't safely voice himself. "Sir, with all due respect," Rourke said, his tone attempting politeness but strain showing through, "this area is scheduled for a developers' meeting. We can't have people sleeping on the sidewalk." "I wasn't sleeping," Isaiah said quietly. "I was eating breakfast." Judge Price nodded thoughtfully. "So no actual ordinance is being violated, and the sidewalk appears to be public property, not private, unless something's changed recently that I'm unaware of." Rourke's face flushed slightly. "Your Honor, I'm just doing my job, keeping the streets clear, maintaining order." "Order is important," the judge agreed, his voice remaining measured, "as is the proper application of the law. Perhaps you could explain which specific laws are being broken here." The crowd had grown larger, people now openly watching instead of hurrying past. A few had taken out their phones, though whether to record or simply check the time was unclear. The weight of their attention seemed to press on Rourke, whose jaw worked silently for a moment. "Look," Rourke said, his voice taking on an edge again. I've got authority to move people along when they're causing a disturbance. What disturbance would that be? Judge Price asked, gesturing to the quiet morning scene. I see a man eating breakfast, taking up perhaps 3 feet of a 15-foot wide sidewalk. No blocked doorways, no aggressive behavior. Isaiah bent down slowly, picking up his scattered Bible and carefully brushing off the cover. The motion drew Rourke's attention back to him, and the officer's face hardened. With all due respect, Your Honor, Rourke said, emphasis heavy on the title, you don't patrol these streets. You don't deal with the complaints we get, the problems these people cause. These people? The judge repeated quietly. You mean citizens, Officer Rourke? Citizens with constitutional rights? A woman in the crowd whispered something to her companion. A man in a business suit had stopped pretending to check his phone and was openly watching now. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows and illuminating the scene in stark detail. I don't need a lecture on constitutional rights, Rourke said, his voice rising slightly. I need to do my job, which is keeping these streets clean and safe. Safe from what, exactly? Judge Price asked, his tone remaining calm but his eyes sharp. Safe from a man eating breakfast? Or safe from the discomfort of having to acknowledge poverty exists in our city? Isaiah carefully folded his cardboard, movements precise and dignified. He'd seen confrontations like this before, though usually without anyone stepping in to help. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a spark of something that had been missing before. Recognition, perhaps, of his own humanity being defended. Your Honor, Rourke said, drawing himself up to his full height, I respect your position, but you're interfering with police business. If you have concerns about how I do my job, you can file a complaint with my supervisor. I'm not interfering, officer, the judge replied. I'm observing, and what I observe is concerning. You've cited no valid legal reason for your actions, displayed aggressive behavior toward a peaceful citizen, and damaged personal property without cause. The morning traffic continued to flow behind them, car horns and engine noise providing a mundane backdrop to the tense scene. A few more people had joined the crowd of onlookers, drawn by the unusual sight of a uniformed officer being publicly questioned by a judge. Rourke's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching visibly. His hand had dropped from his belt, but his fingers were curled into fists at his sides. The easy authority he'd displayed earlier had crumbled, replaced by something harder and more defensive. Yet there was no retreat in his stance, no acknowledgement of overreach. Instead, his expression settled into stubborn defiance, even as the crowd's whispers grew louder and more phones appeared recording the confrontation. The morning air crackled with tension as Officer Rourke's face twisted from defensive anger to something darker. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Isaiah's arm, yanking him roughly to his feet. Isaiah's remaining belongings scattered across the sidewalk as Rourke spun him around, pressing him against the storefront window. That's enough, Rourke barked, fumbling for his handcuffs. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct. Isaiah didn't resist, but his body went rigid with dignity. His cheek pressed against the cold glass as Rourke roughly pulled his arms behind his back. The crowd gasped, and the sound of phone cameras clicking became more pronounced. Officer Rourke, Judge Price's voice cut through the commotion like a steel blade. I need to be very clear about something. I am Federal Judge Nathaniel Price of the United States District Court. What you are doing right now is a civil rights violation, and I am witnessing it in my official capacity. Rourke's hands froze on the handcuffs. The words federal judge seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet street. Even the traffic sounds seemed muted as everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Your Honor, Rourke said, his voice strained but still defiant, this situation requires immediate action. This man has done nothing illegal, Judge Price interrupted, his calm tone carrying an edge of steel. Remove those handcuffs immediately. The crowd had grown larger, forming a loose circle around the scene. Phones recorded from every angle, capturing each moment of the confrontation. A woman in a business suit shook her head in disgust at Rourke's behavior. A teenage boy whispered to his friend, "He can't do that, can he?" Rourke's hands trembled slightly as he processed the situation. The presence of a federal judge changed everything. Or should have. For a moment, his grip on the handcuffs loosened, and it seemed reason might prevail. But pride is a dangerous thing. "Your Honor," Rourke said, tightening his grip on Isaiah again, "I respect your position, but you don't understand the situation on the ground. This man has been causing problems." "What problems specifically?" Judge Price stepped closer, his presence commanding despite his measured tone. "Because what I've witnessed is a peaceful citizen being harassed, his property damaged, and now an attempted false arrest." Isaiah remained silent, his breath fogging the window in front of him. His eyes were closed, but his face showed no fear, only a deep, weary resignation that spoke of too many similar encounters. "He's being disorderly," Rourke insisted, his voice rising, "refusing to comply with lawful orders." "Unlawful orders," Judge Price corrected. "Every command you've given has been without legal basis. Now, I'll say this one more time. Remove those handcuffs." The crowd had grown restless, their murmurs becoming more hostile toward Rourke. A businessman in an expensive suit called out, "Let him go!" Others joined in, their voices building into a chorus of disapproval. Rourke's face reddened as he glanced around, seeing dozens of phones pointed at him, dozens of witnesses to his humiliation. His jaw clenched as he made his decision. The wrong one. "This man," Rourke announced loudly, trying to project authority he no longer commanded, "is under arrest for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and creating a public disturbance." He clicked one cuff around Isaiah's wrist. "Officer," Judge Price's voice had dropped dangerously low, "you are now knowingly violating this man's civil rights in front of a federal judge and dozens of witnesses. Consider very carefully what that means for your career." But Rourke had passed the point of reason. His pride wouldn't let him back down, wouldn't let him admit he'd been wrong. His radio crackled as he keyed it with his free hand. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need backup at 4th and Main. Got a situation with a hostile crowd?" Isaiah finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "I haven't resisted anything, officer. I haven't been hostile." "Shut up," Rourke snapped, the command drawing gasps from the crowd. "You don't get to speak now." In the distance, sirens began to wail. Rourke's face showed grim satisfaction as he heard them approaching. "Now we'll get this situation under control." "Under control?" Judge Price repeated, his eyebrows rising. "Officer, you're the only one who's lost control here. You're the only one escalating a peaceful situation into a confrontation." The sirens grew louder as Rourke maintained his grip on Isaiah, who continued to stand perfectly still, neither resisting nor cooperating. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the scene, highlighting the stark contrast between Rourke's aggressive posture and Isaiah's dignified stillness. "Your backup is coming, officer," Judge Price said quietly. "But consider what you'll tell them. How will you explain assaulting a peaceful citizen in front of a federal judge? How will you justify violating department policy and constitutional rights in front of all these witnesses?" The crowd had swelled to fill the sidewalk, spilling into the street. Their phones captured every moment, every word, every twitch of Rourke's face, as he tried to maintain his authority while everything spiraled out of his control. The sirens were very close now, their wail bouncing off the buildings. Rourke's radio crackled again with dispatch asking for an update, but he couldn't free a hand to respond without releasing either the handcuffs or his grip on Isaiah. His face showed the growing realization that he'd backed himself into a corner, but pride still wouldn't let him find a way out. "Just following procedure," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Just maintaining order." "Is that what you call this?" Judge Price asked softly. "Order." 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb, their lights flashing against the building windows. Lieutenant Pamela Sloan stepped out of the first vehicle, her movements precise and controlled. She surveyed the scene with practiced efficiency. The crowd with their phones raised, Officer Rourke still gripping Isaiah, and Judge Price standing firm nearby. Recognition flickered across her face as she spotted Judge Price. In an instant, her entire demeanor shifted. Where there had been stern authority, there was now diplomatic concern. She approached with measured steps, her voice carrying clearly to the watching crowd. "Your Honor," she said, inclining her head respectfully, "I apologize for this unfortunate situation. We'll get this sorted out immediately." She turned to Rourke, her tone sharp but professional. "Officer Rourke, release Mr." She paused, looking at Isaiah. "Boone," Judge Price supplied. "Isaiah Boone." "Release Mr. Boone immediately," Sloan ordered. Rourke hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying, his movements stiff with suppressed anger. The handcuff fell away from Isaiah's wrist, leaving a red mark where it had been too tight. Isaiah straightened his clothes with quiet dignity, his face betraying no emotion as he looked at his scattered belongings on the sidewalk. A young woman from the crowd stepped forward to help him gather his things, shooting a glare at Rourke as she did so. "Mr. Boone," Sloan said, her voice pitched to carry to the onlookers, "please accept our sincere apologies for this misunderstanding. You're free to go about your day." She gestured to one of the other officers who had arrived. "Officer Martinez will help you collect your belongings." The crowd began to murmur, some nodding in approval at the apparent resolution, others still recording with suspicious expressions. Judge Price watched the scene unfold, his eyes sharp and observant. "Lieutenant," he said, "I trust this incident will be properly documented?" "Of course, Your Honor," Sloan replied smoothly. "We take these matters very seriously. There will be a full review of the circumstances." She turned to address the crowd. "Thank you all for your concern, but the situation is now under control. Please, go about your business." The onlookers began to disperse slowly, though many continued filming as they walked away. Isaiah had finished gathering his belongings, his few possessions now tucked back into his worn backpack. He stood quietly, waiting. "Mr. Boone," Judge Price said, "would you like me to stay?" Isaiah shook his head slightly. "No, sir. Thank you for your help." His voice was steady, but exhaustion lined every word. As Judge Price reluctantly prepared to leave, Lieutenant Sloan moved closer to Rourke, speaking in low tones that didn't carry beyond their immediate space. She gripped his arm firmly, steering him toward one of the police cruisers. "In the car," she muttered. "Now." Once inside, with the doors closed and windows up, Sloane's diplomatic mask fell away. Her eyes turned hard as she looked at Rourke. "You've created quite a mess," she said, her voice cold. "A federal judge? Really?" Rourke started to speak, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I don't want to hear it. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to write your report immediately. In it, you will detail how Mr. Boone was acting aggressively, refusing commands, and creating a disturbance that required police intervention." "But the judge?" Rourke began. "I'll handle the judge," Sloan interrupted. "Your report needs to establish grounds for your initial approach. Make it clear that Mr. Boone's behavior necessitated action. Keep it simple, stick to department keywords, and do not deviate from that narrative. Understood?" Rourke nodded slowly, his earlier bravado replaced by a growing understanding of the situation's gravity. Sloan continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going to contact building security right now. That camera above the storefront? That footage needs to be secured before anyone else thinks to request it. The same goes for any traffic cameras or private security feeds in the area." She pulled out her phone, quickly typing out a message. "I'm sending a team from technical services. They'll handle the footage collection. If anyone asks, it's part of our standard review process." Through the windshield, they could see Isaiah slowly walking away, his shoulders straight despite the morning's events. Judge Price had already departed, though several onlookers lingered, still watching the police presence with wary eyes. "What about all their phone recordings?" Rourke asked, gesturing to the dispersing crowd. "Cell phone videos are unreliable evidence," Sloan replied dismissively. Partial recordings, unclear audio, biased perspectives. We can handle that. Official security footage is different. That needs to be contained. She checked her watch, her movements precise and controlled. You have 1 hour to complete that report. I want it on my desk before any other narratives start circulating. Make it clean, make it believable, and make it stick to protocol. Outside the car, the morning had returned to its usual rhythm. Traffic moved steadily, pedestrians hurried past, and the last few onlookers finally turned away. The incident was already becoming just another story to share on social media, another viral moment to debate online. Lieutenant Sloan watched it all through the tinted windows, her expression now completely stripped of its earlier diplomatic concern. Her eyes tracked Isaiah's departing figure, then swept over the security cameras positioned above the street. She pulled out her phone again, sending another quick message. Remember, she said to Rourke, her voice hard with finality, this incident resulted from a legitimate response to disorderly conduct. That's the only version that exists. That's the only version that will exist. Judge Nathaniel Price stood motionless on the sidewalk where chaos had erupted just hours before. The morning crowd had thinned, leaving behind only scattered paper cups and the lingering tension in the air. His eyes fixed on the security camera above the storefront, its black lens staring back like a silent witness. The sound of shuffling drew his attention. Isaiah had returned to gather the last of his belongings, a tattered paperback book that had skidded under a bench during the confrontation. His movements were careful, deliberate, as if each motion required careful consideration. "Sir," Judge Price called out, his voice gentle but carrying authority. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Isaiah straightened slowly, the book clutched in his weathered hands. His eyes met the judge's, carrying the weary calculation of someone who had learned to measure every interaction for potential threat. "You've already helped enough," Isaiah replied, his words careful and measured. "I appreciate what you did." "I'd like to know your name," the judge pressed, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "Your full name." Isaiah's fingers tightened on the book. "Isaiah Boone," he said finally, the words coming out like reluctant visitors. Judge Price's expression shifted subtly. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by a deep frown of concentration. "Isaiah Boone," he repeated slowly. "The city inspector from the Riverside District case?" Isaiah's posture changed instantly, tension running through his shoulders. His eyes darted to the street, as if measuring the distance to escape. "That was a long time ago," he said flatly. 8 years, Judge Price nodded. The unsafe building violations, the corruption investigation that was suddenly dropped. He paused, watching Isaiah's reaction carefully. "I remember because it was transferred out of my jurisdiction before I could review the evidence." A bitter smile crossed Isaiah's face. "Evidence has a way of disappearing when the right people want it to." "You were the lead inspector," Judge Price continued. "Your reports detailed systematic code violations in dozens of buildings, properties owned by—" "Don't!" Isaiah cut him off sharply. "Those names don't matter anymore. Nothing about that case matters." But Judge Price pressed on, his voice low and steady. "You filed official reports about unsafe conditions, structural issues that put lives at risk. Then suddenly, you were gone, and the case vanished into administrative limbo." Isaiah's laugh was harsh, empty of humor. "That's a nice way of putting it. I filed reports, yes, documented everything, followed every protocol." His voice took on an edge of old anger. "Then I lost my job, my reputation, my home. Funny how speaking up about rich men's crimes makes you the criminal." "Tell me what happened," Judge Price urged quietly. Isaiah looked around the street, his movements those of a man who had learned to always watch his surroundings. "What happened? The same thing that always happens. Money talked. Truth walked. I became a cautionary tale for anyone else thinking about doing the right thing." "You had evidence," the judge prompted. "Had is the key word." Isaiah's voice was tired now. "Files disappeared. Computer records corrupted. Witness statements recanted. The usual dance. He shook his head slowly. You know how it works, Your Honor. The system protects itself. Judge Price stepped closer, his presence commanding but not threatening. The system failed you, Mr. Boone, but the system isn't just buildings and bureaucracy, it's people. People who can still choose to do what's right. With all due respect, Isaiah replied, I've heard that before. From lawyers, from journalists, from good people who meant well. He gestured to his worn clothes, his meager possessions. This is what doing right got me. This is what justice looks like from down here. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows on the sidewalk. A businessman hurried past, deliberately avoiding looking at them. Isaiah watched him go with a knowing expression. I remember the details of your reports, Judge Price said carefully. The pattern of violations, the connected ownership groups, the timing of inspections being overruled. It wasn't just about building codes, was it? Isaiah's silence was heavy with unspoken confirmation. Those buildings, the judge continued, they're still standing, still occupied, still generating profit for the same people who buried your reports. And still just as dangerous, Isaiah added quietly. Maybe more now. 8 years of ignored problems don't fix themselves. A police car rolled past slowly. Both men watched it pass, their conversation pausing until it was gone. The moment highlighted the weight of what remained unsaid. Mr. Boone, Judge Price said finally, what happened to you wasn't justice. It was the opposite. A perversion of the system meant to protect people. The system protects whoever owns it, Isaiah responded, starting to turn away. And that's not people like me. Wait, the judge called. Please, this isn't over. It doesn't have to stay buried. Isaiah paused, his back to the judge. Some things stay buried because digging them up is too dangerous. He took a step forward. Thank you again for your help today, Your Honor. But let the past stay in the past. Judge Price watched as Isaiah walked away, his figure growing smaller against the morning crowd. The worn backpack, the careful way he moved, the dignity that remained unbroken despite everything. It all spoke to years of survival after choosing truth over silence. The judge's hand went to his pocket, feeling the weight of his phone. In his mind, fragments of the old case file flickered. Building numbers, inspection dates, signature blocks, and behind it all, the names of powerful people who had orchestrated a cover-up that destroyed a man's life rather than address deadly violation. Judge Nathaniel Price sat in his chambers, staring at the business card in his hand. The embossed letters caught the early afternoon light. Maya Bennett, legal aid attorney. He'd worked with her before on cases involving systemic abuse. She had a reputation for being relentless when pursuing justice. His intercom buzzed. Ms. Bennett is here, Your Honor. Maya entered with purpose, her practical suit and worn leather briefcase marking her as someone who spent more time in the field than in cushy offices. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her expression was all business. Judge Price, she said, taking the offered seat. Your message said this was urgent. Thank you for coming, Maya. He leaned forward, hands clasped on his desk. I need your help with a situation that requires delicate handling. Maya's eyebrows rose slightly. Coming from you, that's interesting. What's the case? It's not a case. Yet? He described the morning's events, watching her expression shift from professional interest to focused intensity as he detailed Isaiah's background. The Riverside District violations, she said, recognition clear in her voice. I remember reading about that. The inspector who got blackballed. She frowned. The case disappeared so completely, I always wondered what really happened. So did I. Price's voice was grim. Isaiah Boone was that inspector. This morning I saw him being harassed by police, and now I'm certain his current situation isn't accidental. It's the result of systematic retaliation. Maya pulled out a notebook, already taking notes. The original violations. What were we talking about? structural issues in multiple properties, all owned by the same network of shell companies. When Boone started connecting the dots, his life fell apart. Price stood, pacing behind his desk. I can't directly involve myself, not with the position I hold. But you? I can investigate, Maya finished. Talk to him. Build a case, if there's something there. She looked up from her notes. Where can I find him? Price described Isaiah's usual location. There's an outreach van that parks near there. The social workers might know more. He paused. Maya, be careful. The people behind this, they've already shown what they're willing to do to protect themselves. They usually do, she replied, standing. But they also usually make mistakes. Nobody's perfect at covering their tracks. The judge watched her gather her things. He won't trust easily. After what happened. Good, Maya said firmly. He shouldn't. Trust has to be earned, especially when the system's already failed someone this badly. An hour later, Maya spotted the outreach van parked in a quiet side street. 2 social workers were distributing supplies, and she recognized Isaiah from the judge's description. He stood slightly apart from the small group, his posture marking him as someone who preferred to remain unnoticed. She approached carefully, making sure he saw her coming. Mr. Boone? I'm Maya Bennett. I'd like to talk to you about what happened this morning. Isaiah's expression closed immediately. Nothing happened this morning. That's not what Judge Price told me. She kept her voice low, respectful of his privacy. He also told me about your work as a city inspector. Judge Price should mind his own business, Isaiah said flatly, starting to turn away. The unsafe buildings you reported, they're still there, Maya pressed. Still occupied. Still dangerous. Isaiah stopped. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. I've seen cases like this before, Maya continued. Whistleblowers targeted, evidence buried, lives destroyed to protect profit margins. But mistakes leave trails, Mr. Boone. Even years later. He turned back slowly, studying her face. You're a lawyer. Legal aid. I work with people the systems tried to silence. She held out her card. I'd like to hear your story. The real story, not the official version. My story? His laugh was hollow. My story is what happens when you believe in doing the right thing. When you trust the system to protect you. He gestured at his surroundings. This is my story now. Maya didn't back down. Then, let's change the ending. Those buildings you inspected, how many people live in them now? How many families are at risk because your warnings were buried? Something flickered in Isaiah's eyes. An old pain. A remembered responsibility. I know you tried to protect them, she said quietly. Let me help you finish what you started. You don't understand. Isaiah's voice was tight. These people, they don't just break laws. They break people. They took everything. Not everything, Maya countered. They didn't take your truth, your knowledge of what really happened. She paused. They didn't take your voice, Mr. Boone. They just made you afraid to use it. Isaiah looked at the card in his hand, then at the busy street beyond. I filed every report correctly, documented everything, followed every protocol. His words carried the weight of old frustration. It didn't matter. They had friends in every office that mattered. Friends can be enemies when pressure's applied correctly, Maya said. And documents? They leave traces, even when they're deleted. Nothing disappears completely anymore. The outreach van was preparing to leave. Isaiah watched the social workers packing up, his expression conflicted. One meeting, Maya offered. That's all I'm asking for. Let me hear your story, and then you decide if you want to pursue this. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, weighing decades of experience against a fragment of hope he couldn't quite suppress. One meeting, he finally agreed, his voice carrying equal parts resignation and resolve. But not here, somewhere private. Maya nodded, understanding the caution. I have an office at the legal aid clinic. Tomorrow morning? Early, Isaiah specified. Before the building gets busy. He tucked her card carefully into his jacket pocket. his movements deliberate and controlled. Maya's office was barely bigger than a storage closet, crammed with filing cabinets and stacks of documents that left just enough space for a desk and 2 chairs. The morning light filtered weakly through a narrow window, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. Isaiah sat stiffly in the visitor's chair, his weathered hands resting on his knees. The clean shirt he wore, probably from a donation bin, hung loose on his frame, a reminder of how much weight he'd lost over the years. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the room, the door, the window, mapping escape routes out of habit. "Would you like some coffee?" Maya offered, gesturing to the small machine crowded onto a shelf. "No." Isaiah's voice was quiet, but firm. "Let's just get this done." Maya nodded, pulling out a legal pad. "Start from the beginning. Tell me about the buildings you inspected." Isaiah's jaw tightened. Riverside District. 6 apartment complexes, all connected through different shell companies. On paper, they looked separate, but the money all flowed to the same people. He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I noticed the pattern during routine inspections. Same violations, same patch jobs, same excuses." "What kind of violations?" "Everything. Structural damage, faulty wiring, asbestos, black mold." His voice grew harder. "They'd paint over water damage, hide cracks with furniture, threaten tenants who complained. People were getting sick, but nobody could prove why." Maya took notes, her pen scratching quietly. "How did you make the connection between the properties?" "Paper trail, maintenance contracts, utility bills, insurance policies, different company names, but same addresses, same phone numbers. Sloppy mistakes." Isaiah's laugh was bitter. "I thought that would make it easier to prove. Thought the evidence was so clear, they couldn't ignore it. What happened when you reported it?" Isaiah's eyes focused on something distant. "At first, nothing. Reports disappeared. Inspections got reassigned. Then the pressure started. My supervisor called me in, said I was being too aggressive, making problems where there weren't any." He shook his head. "I kept pushing, kept documenting everything. Then they started following me." "Following you?" "Cars outside my house. Phone calls in the middle of the night. Someone broke in, but didn't take anything. Just went through my files." Isaiah's fingers drummed restlessly on his knee. "My wife started getting scared. My kids—" He stopped, swallowing hard. Maya waited, letting him find his way back to the story. "The accusations started next," he continued. "Anonymous tips about bribes I'd supposedly taken. Fake photos of me meeting with contractors. They even planted cash in my desk." His voice shook slightly. "Internal affairs got involved. My union reps stopped returning calls. Even people I thought were friends started avoiding me." "How long did this go on?" 3 months. Felt like 3 years. Isaiah straightened in his chair, his posture reflecting old defiance. "I knew what they were doing. Knew they were trying to break me. But those buildings, there were families in there. Kids. Elderly people who couldn't afford to move. Someone had to speak up." Maya leaned forward. "What was the final straw?" "My daughter's college acceptance got rescinded. No explanation. Just a letter saying her spot had been given to someone else." The pain in his voice was raw, immediate. "That same week, my wife's job suddenly disappeared. Position eliminated. Then our mortgage company found errors in our paperwork. They went after your family to get to you," Maya said quietly. Isaiah nodded. "My wife took the kids to her sister's. Said she couldn't live with the stress anymore. Can't blame her." He looked down at his hands. "A week later, they fired me. Misconduct, falsifying reports, taking bribes, everything they'd manufactured. My pension, gone. My reputation, destroyed. Nobody would hire me after that. And the buildings? Still there. Still making money for the same people. Still killing people slowly." Isaiah's voice was tired now. "I drive by sometimes, see the same cracks getting bigger, same windows patched with plywood. Nothing changed except my life. Maya set down her pen. But this morning changed something. Officer Rourke's actions, Judge Price's involvement, it creates an opening. A way to revisit everything that happened. Isaiah shook his head. Those people own half the city. They've got judges, politicians, police chiefs in their pockets. What's different now? Digital records, Maya said firmly. Email trails, electronic payments, things that leave traces we couldn't track before. And people talk more now. Social media, online reviews. Tenants document everything with their phones. She leaned forward. Plus, some of those old connections might have shifted. People retire, alliances change, new investigations uncover old patterns. You sound like I did, Isaiah said, before I learned how the world really works. The world changes, Maya countered. Look at how many corporations are falling now, how many cover-ups are being exposed. People are angry about corruption in a way they weren't before. They're paying attention. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. You really believe you can fight them? I believe we can make them fight themselves, Maya replied. Start pulling threads, watch things unravel, create enough pressure, and someone always makes a mistake. Someone always talks. And what happens to me? Isaiah asked. What's left for them to take? They took everything because you were alone, Maya said. This time, you'll have legal protection, media coverage, public support. She tapped her notes. And this time, we'll be ready for their tactics. Isaiah's gaze drifted to the window, watching the city wake up outside. The same city that had betrayed him, but also the city he'd tried to protect. Somewhere out there, families were living in those buildings, facing the same dangers he'd documented years ago. Maya watched him carefully, recognizing the weight of memory and responsibility in his silence. Finally, she asked the question that would determine everything. Do you still have proof? Isaiah's hands tightened on his knees, and he hesitated. The fluorescent lights of the police precinct buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Lieutenant Sloane's office. She stood behind her desk, arms crossed, watching Officer Rourke pace like a caged animal. Stop moving, she ordered. You're giving me a headache. Rourke halted, but his jaw worked back and forth. That judge had no right to interfere. I was doing my job. Your job? Sloane's voice was ice cold. Your job was to maintain order, not create a spectacle that landed on a federal judge's radar. She picked up a report form. Now sit down. We need to get our story straight. Rourke dropped into a chair, still fuming. What's there to get straight? That bum was being disorderly. That bum has a name, Sloane cut in. Isaiah Boone. And thanks to your little power trip, I had to spend my morning making calls about him. She tapped her keyboard, bringing up a file. Former city inspector. Started causing problems a few years back, making accusations about building code violations, mental health issues, paranoid delusions about being followed, lost his job, his family, ended up on the streets. Perfect, Rourke said, leaning forward. So he's unstable. If we play it right. Sloane turned the monitor so he could see. I'm writing it up as a welfare check gone wrong. You noticed concerning behavior, attempted to direct him to services. He became agitated, combative. He wasn't combative, Rourke protested. He just sat there, being what? Defiant? Threatening? Sloane's smile was sharp. Write it how you need to. Just make sure it matches the narrative we're building. Across town, Maya Bennett was hitting walls. She stood outside a coffee shop near the morning's incident, trying to convince the owner to share security footage. I'm sorry, the woman said, not meeting Maya's eyes. We had some technical issues this morning. System crashed, lost everything. Maya noticed the woman's hands fidgeting with her apron. That's interesting, because I can see your camera's working fine right now. Look, I can't help you. The owner glanced toward the street. Please don't ask me again. Maya stepped outside, frustration building. 3 businesses, 3 similar stories. The bookstore's cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned. The bank's footage was accidentally overwritten. The parking garage had routine maintenance that morning. Her phone buzzed. A text from a witness who'd recorded the incident. Sorry. Deleted the video. Phone storage full. Another dead end. She walked to her car, making notes. The pattern was too perfect, too coordinated. This wasn't just Rourke covering his tracks. Someone with authority was orchestrating this, making calls, applying pressure. Back at the precinct, Sloane was on the phone, her voice professionally concerned. Yes, I understand your organization wants to help, but Mr. Boone has shown increasingly erratic behavior. We're worried about liability issues. She paused, listening. Of course, we care about the homeless population. But for everyone's safety, it might be best to direct him to other resources outside the area. She hung up, marking another name off her list. 3 outreach organizations contacted. 3 agreements to redirect Isaiah if he sought help. The net was tightening. Rourke returned with his completed report. Sloane scanned it, nodding approvingly at the careful construction of threat and instability. Good. File it immediately. And Rourke? She fixed him with a stern look. No more confrontations. If you see him again, radio it in. Let others handle it. Yes, Lieutenant. He hesitated at the door. What if that judge makes trouble? Judge Price has his own concerns to worry about, Sloane said smoothly. I've already spoken with people who can remind him of that. Maya's next stop was the homeless outreach center where Isaiah sometimes got meals. The director, Tom Harris, had always been friendly and cooperative. Today, he barely opened his door. I'm sorry, Maya. We have no record of Mr. Boone using our services. His eyes darted nervously. Tom, I was here last week when he got breakfast. You know him. Our policy is not to discuss individual clients. He started to close the door. Maya caught it. Who got to you? What did they threaten you with? Please, he whispered. We can't lose our funding. We help hundreds of people. The door clicked shut. Maya stood there, pieces clicking together in her mind. The disappeared footage, the synchronized stories, the sudden silence from witnesses, the pressure on outreach groups. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She answered cautiously. Ms. Bennett? The voice was professional, female. This is Sandra Morton from the Bar Association Ethics Committee. We've received some concerning reports about your recent activities. Maya ended the call, her hand shaking slightly. They were moving fast, pulling strings she didn't even know existed. This wasn't just a rogue officer or a department covering its tracks. This was coordinated, efficient, practiced. She got back in her car, checking her mirrors more carefully now. A patrol car rolled past, slowly. The officer inside made a point of writing something down. Maya opened her laptop, starting a new document. She began mapping connections. The businesses that claimed technical issues, the outreach groups suddenly changing policies, the witnesses who went silent. The pattern expanded outward like a web, each strand leading back to centers of power and influence. This wasn't about one sidewalk confrontation. This wasn't even about one corrupt officer. This was a system protecting itself, closing ranks with practiced efficiency. Someone high up saw Isaiah as a threat, not for who he was now, but for what he knew from before. Maya stared at her growing diagram, remembering Isaiah's hesitation when she asked about proof. She hadn't understood the weight of that question then. She did now. Maya's car pulled up to a modest 2-story house in the suburbs. The front yard was neat, with carefully tended flower beds lining the walkway. The mailbox read E. Boone in simple black letters. She double-checked the address she'd found through public records, then took a deep breath. The walk to the front door felt longer than it should. Maya had made countless difficult visits to clients' families, but this one was different. This wasn't just about a case. It was about reuniting what remained of a broken family. She pressed the doorbell. Inside, she heard movement, then footsteps approaching. The door opened, revealing a woman in her late 50s. Evelyn Boone had the same steady gaze as her brother, though hers was sharpened by years of working as a school principal. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and carried herself with natural authority. "Can I help you?" Evelyn asked, her tone professional but guarded. "Ms. Boone, I'm Maya Bennett. I'm an attorney, and I need to speak with you about your brother, Isaiah." The change was immediate. Evelyn's composed expression cracked, pain flashing across her features before she could hide it. "I'm sorry, but I don't discuss my brother with strangers." She started to close the door. "He's alive, Ms. Boone," Maya said quickly. "I spoke with him today." Evelyn froze, her hand still on the door. "That's not possible. We searched for years. The police said—" Her voice trembled slightly. "Please," Maya said softly. "Let me explain." Minutes later, they sat in Evelyn's living room. Family photos covered the walls, graduations, holidays, celebrations. But Maya noticed the gaps, the missing years where Isaiah should have been. "Where is he?" Evelyn asked, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Why now? After all this time?" Maya explained the morning's events, watching Evelyn's face grow increasingly pale. When she described Isaiah's current situation, homeless, discredited, alone, Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth. "I should have looked harder," she whispered. "We gave up. The police said he'd probably left the state, started over somewhere else. They showed us evidence." She trailed off, realization dawning. "They lied to us, didn't they?" "It seems that way," Maya confirmed gently. "Isaiah was here the whole time, just invisible. The system made sure of that." Evelyn stood abruptly, moving to a cabinet. She pulled out a thick folder, its edges worn. "I kept everything." News clippings about the corruption he reported, copies of his letters to the department, photos from when he still worked as an inspector. She turned to Maya, her voice stronger now. "Where can I find him?" An hour later, Maya's car pulled up to a small park where Isaiah sometimes spent afternoons. He sat on a bench, watching children play on the swings. He looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable, as if expecting the world to strike at him again. Evelyn got out of the car slowly, her steps uncertain. Isaiah hadn't seen them yet. Maya stayed back, giving them space, but remaining close enough to intervene if needed. "Isaiah!" Evelyn's voice shook. He turned, and for a long moment, brother and sister just stared at each other. Decades of separation hung between them like a physical barrier. "Evelyn," he said finally, his usual quiet dignity cracking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She rushed forward then, pulling him into a fierce hug. Isaiah stiffened at first, unused to human contact, then gradually relaxed into his sister's embrace. "Don't you dare apologize," Evelyn said fiercely. "You did nothing wrong. We're the ones who stopped looking." They sat together on the bench, the evening light casting long shadows across the grass. Isaiah spoke haltingly, explaining pieces of his story, how the department had systematically destroyed his credibility, how they'd cut him off from resources, how shame and fear had kept him from reaching out. "I couldn't bring that danger to your door," he said. "They made it clear what would happen if I didn't disappear." Evelyn wiped tears from her cheeks. "You protected us by staying away. It wasn't a question." "They threatened your job at the school," Isaiah confirmed quietly. "Said they'd make sure you never worked in education again. I couldn't let that happen." Maya watched as Evelyn took her brother's weathered hands in hers. "Well, I'm retired now. They can't threaten my career anymore." She looked at him firmly. "And I'm not letting you disappear again." "It's not safe," Isaiah protested. "After this morning—" "You let me worry about that," Evelyn cut him off. "I have a spare room, security cameras, and enough anger to fuel a small revolution." She turned to Maya. "What do you need from us?" Maya stepped forward. "First, we need to get Isaiah somewhere safe. They're already pressuring local shelters and outreach programs to turn him away." "He's coming home with me," Evelyn said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Let them try to stop that." Isaiah looked between them, uncertainty warring with desperate hope on his face. "The police." "Will have to go through me to get to you," Evelyn finished. And trust me, brother, I've handled worse than bullies with badges. I was a high school principal for 25 years. For the first time since Maya had met him, Isaiah smiled, small and hesitant, but real. The evening had deepened around them, but the crushing isolation that had surrounded him for so long had finally cracked. Maya watched as Evelyn gathered Isaiah's few possessions, as she guided him to her car with gentle determination, as she fussed over his thin jacket and tired eyes. The system had worked hard to erase Isaiah Boone, to make him invisible and alone, but they hadn't counted on the fierce love of a sister who'd found him again. Evening settled over the city as Maya's phone buzzed continuously. She sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of legal documents, watching a shaky video clip for the 10th time. Someone in the crowd had managed to capture part of Rourke's confrontation with Isaiah, and despite the police department's efforts, it had found its way online. "This changes everything," she said to Isaiah, who sat quietly in her office. The video showed Rourke's aggressive stance, his hand reaching for his weapon, the fear in bystanders' faces. Most importantly, it captured his words clearly. "I don't care if you have rights. You don't belong here." Evelyn, who hadn't left her brother's side since their reunion, leaned forward. "How many views now?" "Over 50,000, Maya replied, refreshing the page. "And climbing. Local news stations are picking it up." Isaiah watched the screen with a mix of hope and apprehension. After decades of being ignored, the sudden attention felt overwhelming. "They'll try to bury it," he said softly. "Too late," Maya smiled, turning her laptop to show them the latest headlines. "Police Department places officer on administrative leave pending investigation." The local news website displayed Rourke's official photo alongside coverage of the incident. Comments flooded the article, many from witnesses who had been present that morning. The story was growing legs. Lieutenant Sloan released a statement, Maya continued, reading from her screen. "The department takes all allegations of misconduct seriously. Officer Rourke has been placed on administrative leave while we conduct a thorough internal investigation." She looked up. "It's damage control, but it's a start." Isaiah shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Last time I thought things would change. They destroyed my life instead." Evelyn reached over and squeezed his hand. "This time, you're not alone." Maya's phone rang, another reporter seeking comment. She'd been fielding calls all afternoon as the story spread. Each news outlet wanted to know more about Isaiah's background, about his history with the city's building inspection department. "There's something else," Isaiah said after Maya finished the call. "Something I haven't told you yet." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When they forced me out, I couldn't take anything with me. But I had help, Father Michael at St. Augustine's. He kept some things safe for me." "What kinds of things?" Maya asked, instantly alert. "Records, inspection reports, photos of code violations that were never addressed." Isaiah's voice grew stronger. "Evidence of bribes, names of officials who looked the other way. Father Michael hid them in the church basement." Maya sat up straighter. "Is he still there? At St. Augustine's?" Isaiah shook his head. "He passed away 5 years ago. But he told me once that everything was still there, waiting. Said he'd made sure it would be safe until it was needed." "We need to go there," Maya said, already gathering her things. "Now, before anyone else realizes what might be hidden in that basement." The drive to St. Augustine's was tense with anticipation. The old church stood dark against the evening sky, its stone walls holding decades of secrets. A young priest answered their knock, listening carefully to their explanation. "Father Michael," he smiled in recognition. "He left very specific instructions about certain items in the basement. Said the right person would come asking someday." He led them down narrow stairs, past rows of storage rooms, to a small door at the very back. Inside, cardboard boxes lined metal shelves, thick with dust. Isaiah moved slowly among them, reading faded labels, until he stopped at one marked simply Records MF. "His initials," Isaiah explained, carefully lifting the box. "Michael Flanagan." They carried the box back to Maya's office, where they spread its contents across her desk. Hundreds of pages of documentation lay before them. Inspection reports with attached photographs, internal memos, handwritten notes detailing conversations and threats. Father Michael had preserved everything. "Look at this," Evelyn said, holding up a stack of photographs. They showed crumbling support beams, exposed wiring, compromised foundations, all in buildings that had later been declared safe. Maya examined document after document, her expression growing more determined. "This is a gold mine," she said. "Not just about your case, Isaiah, but about the whole system of corruption. Names, dates, specific violations that were covered up." Isaiah picked up a photo of himself from 15 years ago, standing in front of a construction site. He looked younger, confident, unbroken by what was to come. "They said I was lying," he said quietly. "Said I had no proof." "Well, you have proof now," Maya replied firmly. "And the timing couldn't be better. With the video going viral and media attention growing, this evidence will be impossible to ignore." Evelyn started organizing the documents into categories, her educational administrator skills coming in handy. "We need to make copies," she said. "Multiple copies, stored in different places." "Already on it," Maya nodded, feeding pages through her scanner. "I'm sending encrypted files to trusted colleagues. No one can make these disappear." Isaiah watched them work, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just a fleeting moment of possibility, but solid, documented hope. The kind backed by evidence and witnesses and public attention. His phone buzzed. Another news alert about Rourke's suspension. The officer's face looked less intimidating now, more like what he truly was: a bully whose power was slipping away. "Isaiah," Maya called softly. He looked up to find both her and Evelyn watching him. "You okay?" He nodded slowly, touching the box that had waited so patiently to reveal its truths. "I think," he said carefully, "this time might be different." The evening deepened outside Maya's office windows, but inside, hope continued to build, document by document, truth by long-buried truth. The city's machinery moved fast once darkness fell. By midnight, Lieutenant Sloan had mobilized a full response, her carefully crafted press statement hitting news desks across the city. Recent allegations against the police department are based on unreliable sources and outdated, potentially falsified documentation, the statement read. "The individual making these claims has a history of mental instability and making unfounded accusations." Maya's phone rang at 1 a.m. "They're already discrediting the evidence," she told Isaiah and Evelyn, who had stayed late at her office. "Someone high up is pushing back hard." Isaiah sat slumped in his chair, watching the late-night news coverage shift. The sympathetic tone from earlier was morphing into something else. "Former city inspector with history of erratic behavior," one caption read. Another showed his old personnel file photo next to the word "disputed" in bold letters. "This is how it started last time," he said quietly. "They twist everything until you don't recognize your own truth anymore." Evelyn paced the office, anger evident in every step. "But we have the documents, Father Michael's records." "Are being challenged," Maya interrupted, scanning a new email. "They're claiming the chain of custody is broken, that the documents could have been altered during their time in storage. They're even suggesting Father Michael wasn't mentally competent in his later years." A knock at the door made them all jump. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway, faces neutral, but stance aggressive. "Ms. Bennett?" one asked. "We need to speak with Mr. Boone regarding allegations of false statements to law enforcement." Maya stepped between them and Isaiah. "My client has no comment. Any questions can be directed to me during business hours. Ma'am, we have concerns about his current mental state and—" "Get out!" Maya's voice cut like steel. "Now! Or I file harassment charges." The officers withdrew, but their presence left a chill in the room. Isaiah's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. At 2:30 a.m., Evelyn's phone lit up with a text from her neighbor. "There are police cars outside your house," it read. "They're saying they have a warrant." "What?" Evelyn's voice cracked. "They can't. They have no right." Maya was already dialing. "Judge Price? I'm sorry to wake you, but we have a situation." But even the judge's intervention came too late. By the time Evelyn rushed home, officers had already searched her house, claiming they were looking for additional documentation related to an ongoing investigation. "They went through everything," Evelyn said, her voice shaking as she described the scene over the phone to Maya. "My personal files, my computer, even old photo albums. They said they were investigating possible conspiracy to defame law enforcement." Isaiah listened to his sister's voice, each word hitting him like a physical blow. This was his fault. They were targeting her because of him. The local morning news show aired its first report at 4 a.m. The anchor's voice carried practiced concern. "New developments in the controversial police confrontation case. Key witness Marcus Thompson now says he may have misinterpreted what he saw." The screen showed Thompson, a young man who had been present during Rourke's confrontation with Isaiah. "In the heat of the moment, things can look different than they really are," he said, not meeting the camera's eye. "Officer Rourke was just doing his job. I shouldn't have posted that video." Maya swore under her breath. "They got to him. Probably threatened his job or worse." Social media feeds began filling with newly created accounts questioning Isaiah's credibility. Old complaints from his inspector days resurfaced, carefully edited to paint him as unstable and vindictive. "We should head home," Maya said finally, gathering her files. "Get some rest. We'll regroup in a few hours and—" "No," Isaiah interrupted. "You both need to step back from this." Evelyn moved toward him. "Isaiah, don't—" "They're going to destroy anyone who helps me," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Just like last time. I won't let that happen again." "We're not giving up," Maya insisted. "This is exactly what they want. If we just—" "I need some air," Isaiah cut her off, standing abruptly. "Just give me a minute." He walked out of the office before either woman could stop him. Through the window, they watched him pace the parking lot, shoulders bent under an invisible weight. "He'll be okay," Maya tried to reassure Evelyn. "He just needs time to process." But when they checked 10 minutes later, Isaiah was gone. The sky was just beginning to lighten when Evelyn found the note tucked under her coffee cup where she'd left it on Maya's desk. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. "I'm sorry. Can't watch them hurt anyone else because of me. Thank you for trying. Please don't look for me this time. Isaiah." Maya immediately started making calls, but Isaiah had vanished into the pre-dawn shadows, leaving them with nothing but a piece of paper and the hollow feeling of history repeating itself. Evelyn sank into a chair, holding the note with trembling hands. "He's gone," she whispered. "I just found him. And now he's gone again." Outside, the city stirred to life, unaware of the small tragedy playing out in one downtown office. Traffic began to build as early commuters headed to work. A garbage truck made its rounds, metal bins clanging in the quiet morning air. Somewhere in those awakening streets, Isaiah Boone walked away from hope once again, believing that his disappearance was the only gift he could give those who had tried to help him. The morning sun cast long shadows across empty streets as Maya and Evelyn drove through the city's forgotten corners. Every homeless shelter, every soup kitchen, every place Isaiah might seek refuge yielded nothing but sympathetic headshakes and worried looks. "He knows these streets too well," Maya said, steering through another intersection. "If he doesn't want to be found—" Evelyn pressed her hand against the passenger window, scanning the sidewalks. "I can't lose him again. Not like this." Her voice cracked. 20 years I thought he was dead. Now he's out there somewhere, thinking he has to disappear to protect us." Maya's phone buzzed. Judge Price's name lit up the screen. She put it on speaker. "I think I know where he might be," the judge said without preamble. "The old Riverside complex on 12th Street. It's where everything started." "The building that burned?" Evelyn asked, sitting straighter. Yes, it's been abandoned since the fire. I'm heading there now. Maya made a sharp U-turn, tires squealing. We'll meet you. No, Price cut in firmly. Let me talk to him first. Sometimes it takes someone who's seen the same shadows to help find the light again. The line went dead. Evelyn started to protest, but Maya shook her head. The judge is right. Isaiah needs to make this choice himself. The Riverside complex loomed against the morning sky like a decaying monument to corruption. Judge Price parked his car and walked slowly toward the chain-link fence surrounding the property. Faded "no trespassing" signs rattled in the breeze. He found Isaiah sitting on a concrete barrier, staring at the burnt-out shell of the building. 20 years of weathering hadn't erased the scorch marks that climbed the walls like black fingers. 6 people died here, Isaiah said, without turning. His voice was heavy with old pain. I tried to tell them the wiring was dangerous. Filed report after report. But someone got paid to look the other way. Price settled beside him on the barrier. I remember the case. The construction company claimed the fire started in a tenant's apartment. Faulty space heater. They buried my inspection reports. Called me unstable when I wouldn't back down. Isaiah's hands clenched. Then they made sure I lost everything. My job, my reputation, my home. Even my family thought I'd lost my mind. And now they're trying the same playbook again, Price observed quietly. That's why I had to leave. Maya, Evelyn, they don't deserve to have their lives destroyed because of me. Price was silent for a long moment, watching the sun climb higher over the ruins. You know what I see when I look at this building, Isaiah? Isaiah turned to him finally, questioning. I see proof. Proof that you were right. Proof that your voice mattered, even if they tried to silence it. Those inspection reports you filed? They're still in the court records. I pulled them last night. The truth was there all along, waiting for someone to look. What good is truth if they can just bury it again? Isaiah's voice was bitter. The truth doesn't stay buried forever, Price said. But it needs witnesses who refuse to look away, who stand their ground not because they expect justice, but because their dignity demands nothing less. A pigeon landed nearby, pecking at loose gravel. Isaiah watched it, his expression softening slightly. I'm tired of fighting battles I can't win. Then stop fighting to win, Price suggested. Fight to witness, to testify, to stand in your truth, regardless of what they do with it. Like you did that day on the sidewalk? Price nodded. I didn't step in because I thought I could change Officer Rourke's mind. I stepped in because staying silent wasn't an option. Some moments demand we speak, even if no one listens. Isaiah stood, walking closer to the fence, his fingers curled around the metal links. When I was inspecting buildings, I used to tell myself that even if I could only save one person, it would be worth it. Somewhere along the way, I lost that. It's not too late to find it again, Price said. Maya's already gathering evidence of witness tampering. Evelyn's ready to testify about the search of her home. The system's pushing back hard because they're scared. Of what? One homeless man? Of the truth you carry. Of what happens when people start asking why a respected city inspector ended up on the streets. Of the paper trail that leads from this building to the present day. Price stood, joining Isaiah at the fence. They're not just trying to discredit you now. They're trying to bury their own past. The morning had grown warmer. Traffic sounds drifted from nearby streets as the city fully awakened. Isaiah's shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly. Maya and Evelyn, he said softly. Are they okay? Worried about you, but stronger than you give them credit for. Price pulled out his phone. They're nearby. One call and they'll be here. Isaiah stared at the burned building for a long moment. I thought running would protect them. But that's what the people who did this want, isn't it? For all of us to run, to hide, to stay quiet. It's your choice, Price said. But remember, you're not just a victim in this story. You're a witness. And witnesses don't run from the truth. They stand in it. Isaiah took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. The morning sun caught his face, highlighting a determination that had been buried but never truly lost. "Make the call," he said. Maya's office felt cramped with 4 people squeezed around her desk, but no one complained. The morning light streamed through dusty blinds as they listened to the retired clerk, Sarah Martinez, explain in a trembling voice. "I kept copies," she said, placing a thick manila envelope on the desk. "Not the originals. Those disappeared years ago. But I had this feeling." She wrung her hands, glancing at Isaiah, who sat quietly in the corner. "After what they did to Mr. Boone, I just couldn't let it all vanish." Maya carefully opened the envelope, spreading out yellowed papers and old computer printouts. Her eyes widened as she scanned the documents. "These are system logs from the building department's database." Isaiah leaned forward slightly, his weathered face tightening. "The inspection reports?" "More than that," Maya said, organizing papers into neat piles. "These logs show exactly when files were accessed, modified, and deleted. Look at these timestamps." Judge Price adjusted his glasses, examining the printouts. 3 days after the Riverside fire. Multiple entries were altered. "I was just a clerk back then," Sarah said, her voice steadying as she spoke. "I noticed the changes because I had processed Mr. Boone's original reports. When I mentioned it to my supervisor," she swallowed hard, "he told me to forget about it if I wanted to keep my job." Maya pulled out her laptop, typing rapidly. "These modification dates match perfectly with the timeline Isaiah gave us. And look," she pointed to a series of user IDs. "These administrative access codes, they trace back to terminals in the mayor's office, not the building department." Isaiah stood slowly, moving closer to the desk. His hands trembled slightly as he touched one of the papers. "All these years, I thought everything was gone." "They were thorough," Sarah admitted. "But they didn't know about the backup server logs. Those were automatically archived off-site every night. By the time they realized, it was too late to erase them without leaving even more evidence." Judge Price studied another document intently. "These access logs show Lieutenant Sloan's credentials being used to pull security footage from last week. The same pattern of covering tracks." Maya nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "And look at these email headers. Sloan was corresponding with the same development company involved in the Riverside fire. They're still operating, just under a different name. They're demolishing more buildings next month," Isaiah said quietly. "In the same neighborhood where I've been staying." Sarah dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I should have come forward sooner, but after seeing what happened to Mr. Boone, I was scared. I had kids in college, a mortgage." Isaiah moved around the desk and gently touched her shoulder. "You're here now. That's what matters." Maya's printer hummed to life, spitting out page after page. "These records prove systematic tampering. The timestamps create an unbreakable chain of evidence." She looked up at Isaiah. "They can't claim you were unstable or imagining things. The data tells the story." "The building department's current inspection records," Judge Price mused, examining another document. "Notice anything familiar about these signatures?" Maya leaned over. "The same officials who buried Isaiah's reports? They're still signing off on inspections. Some of these buildings are in even worse shape than Riverside was," Isaiah said, his voice heavy with knowledge earned from years on the streets. "I've seen the cracks in the foundations, the faulty wiring, history repeating itself." Sarah straightened in her chair. "I'll testify. About everything. The file tampering, the pressure to stay quiet, all of it." Maya began organizing the documents into clear plastic sleeves, her movements precise and purposeful. "With these records and your testimony, we can prove both the historical pattern and the current attempt at cover-up. The timestamps don't lie." "They'll try to discredit me," Sarah said nervously. "Say I'm disgruntled, that I stole confidential documents." "Let them try," Maya replied firmly. "Every attack they make will only reinforce the pattern of intimidation. And these access logs are self-authenticating under federal rules of evidence. The timestamps and user IDs create their own validation." Isaiah stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline. All those years on the street, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. My work, my reputation, my voice. He turned back to the room. But the truth was here all along, waiting. Truth has a way of surfacing, Judge Price said quietly. Sometimes it just needs patient witnesses. Maya continued preparing the documents, cross-referencing each page against her digital copies. We'll need to move quickly before they realize what we have. Once these records become part of the official court file, they can't be buried again. Sarah watched the careful documentation process, her shoulders gradually relaxing. What you said about the current inspection records, about history repeating, maybe that's why I finally came forward. I couldn't bear to see more people get hurt. Your testimony connects everything, Maya explained, sealing another document sleeve. It shows this isn't just about one incident or one cover-up. It's a systemic pattern that's still putting lives at risk. Isaiah picked up one of the old inspection reports, his fingers tracing his own signature from 20 years ago. All that time, I thought I was crazy, seeing dangers no one else would acknowledge, fighting shadows that no one else could see. The shadows were real, Maya said, looking up from her work. And now we can prove it. The morning light had strengthened, pushing back the office shadows. Maya's desk disappeared under organized stacks of evidence, each page a piece of truth finally restored, each timestamp a vindication 2 decades in the making. Sarah stood, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. What happens now? Maya closed the last document sleeve with a decisive snap. Now we let the evidence speak for itself. 20 years of silence is enough. The federal courtroom buzzed with tension as Isaiah Boone took the stand. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The packed gallery held its breath, reporters' pens poised over notepads. Isaiah's voice carried clear and steady, years of shame falling away as he spoke. I documented every violation, every crack in the foundation, every faulty wire, every fire hazard. It's all there in the reports, the ones they tried to bury. The federal prosecutor moved methodically, displaying enlarged copies of the recovered documents. Mr. Boone, can you identify these inspection reports? Yes, Isaiah said, sitting straighter. Those are my original findings from the Riverside District. Each page has my signature and date stamp. And what happened when you submitted these reports? They disappeared. My supervisor said they were never received. When I tried to resubmit them, I was accused of fabricating violations. Isaiah's eyes swept the courtroom, resting briefly on Russell Vane's expensive suit. A week later, I was fired. They said I was unstable, making false claims. The prosecutor nodded. And the buildings you flagged as unsafe? The Riverside apartment complex burned 3 months later. 6 people died. Isaiah's voice remained steady, but his hands gripped the witness stand. It could have been prevented. Officer Rourke shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the questioning turned to recent events. Under cross-examination, his arrogance crumbled rapidly. So, you're saying Mr. Boone was aggressive? The prosecutor asked. That's right, Rourke snapped. He was causing a disturbance. Yet the security footage shows him sitting quietly. How do you explain that? Rourke's face reddened. He must have done something before the camera. The timestamps cover the entire morning, the prosecutor interrupted. There was no disturbance. In fact, the only aggressive behavior came from you, didn't it, Officer Rourke? I was maintaining order. By kicking a homeless man's belongings? By attempting an illegal arrest in front of a federal judge? Rourke's testimony unraveled further as he contradicted his own incident report. His claims of feeling threatened fell apart against the video evidence. When questioned about Lieutenant Sloan's involvement, he hesitated too long. Lieutenant Sloan maintained her composed facade on the stand, but the email evidence spoke louder than her denials. The prosecutor displayed message after message between her office and Vane Development Group. Lieutenant, Can you explain why you ordered security footage collected before any complaint was filed? Sloane's practiced smile slipped. Standard procedure. Is it also standard procedure to share that footage with private developers before your own internal affairs division? The gallery murmured as emails appeared on the courtroom screens. Dates, times, and user IDs created an undeniable pattern of coordination between police leadership and Vane's company. Russell Vane's testimony marked the final collapse of the facade. His polished demeanor cracked under detailed financial records showing payments to city officials, altered inspection reports, and strategic property acquisitions that followed each accidental fire. Mr. Vane, the prosecutor said, these records show your company purchased the Riverside property 3 days after the fire, at a fraction of its previous value. The same pattern appears 6 other times in the past 5 years. Can you explain that? Vane glanced at his attorney. Market opportunities. Opportunities created by fires in buildings your company knew were unsafe? Buildings where safety violations were actively hidden? Sarah Martinez's testimony provided the final piece. Her voice trembled but held firm as she detailed years of systematic document alteration. She pointed to specific dates, names, and authorization codes that proved the corruption's reach. They didn't just hide the reports, she explained. They changed inspection records, deleted violation notices, backdated approvals, but the system logs caught everything, every deletion, every change, every cover-up. The evidence mounted in methodical waves. Isaiah's original inspection reports, the tampered database records, emails between developers and city officials, money transfers, altered documents. Each piece connected to the next, building an irrefutable picture of decades-long corruption. The gallery watched in stunned silence as the prosecutor displayed a current map of the city. Red dots marked buildings with hidden violations. Yellow dots showed properties acquired after suspicious fires. Green dots represented upcoming demolition sites. The pattern was impossible to ignore. This isn't about one incident or one cover-up, the prosecutor said. This is an ongoing criminal enterprise that turned public safety into a profit center. They didn't just ignore violations, they exploited them. They didn't just silence whistleblowers, they destroyed lives to protect their scheme. Isaiah sat quietly as the final evidence was presented. He watched Rourke's defiance crumble into fear, saw Sloane's composure crack under the weight of her own emails, observed Vane's expensive suit wilt as his empire of paper and lies collapsed. The federal judge leaned forward. Given the extent of evidence and the ongoing nature of these crimes, I'm ordering immediate action. He nodded to federal marshals stationed around the courtroom. Take them into custody. The gallery erupted in murmurs as marshals moved in. Rourke stood up, protesting loudly, but his voice shook. Sloane remained seated, her face a mask of resignation as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Vane's attorney frantically whispered legal advice, but the developer had finally run out of strings to pull. Throughout the courtroom, more marshals were already moving. Their radios crackled with coordinated arrest orders. Other developers, city officials, building inspectors. The network of corruption was being dismantled in real time. Isaiah watched silently as those who had once wielded power so carelessly were led away. 20 years of lies unraveled in a single afternoon of truth. Sunlight warmed the transformed city block, where everything had started. Gone was the shuttered storefront where Isaiah had once sought shelter. In its place stood the gleaming facade of the Boone Community Advocacy Center, its windows bright and welcoming in the morning light. Isaiah stood on the same patch of sidewalk where Officer Rourke had tried to erase him just weeks ago. The memory felt distant now, like a fading bruise. He watched people entering and leaving the center, no longer averting their eyes or hurrying past. Still feels strange, doesn't it? Evelyn appeared beside him, 2 coffee cups in hand. She passed one to Isaiah, their fingers brushing in a gesture that had become comfortable again. Every morning, Isaiah admitted, sipping the coffee. Keep expecting to wake up back on that cardboard. The local newspaper sat folded under his arm, its headline still visible. Former Officer Rourke faces federal charges. Below that, a smaller headline announced Lieutenant Sloan's plea deal and cooperation with ongoing investigations. Did you see the business section? Evelyn asked, unfolding her own copy. Vane Development's stock dropped another 30%. They're talking bankruptcy. Isaiah nodded. The empire Russell Vane had built on suffering and shortcuts was crumbling. Banks had frozen accounts. Investors were fleeing. Properties were being seized. Each day brought new revelations of corruption, new charges, new arrests. Mayor's office called again, Isaiah said quietly. They want to name the new Safety Oversight Committee after me. Evelyn smiled. And? Told them to name it after the people who died in those fires instead. He paused, watching a group of volunteers setting up tables for the center's morning program. Their names matter more than mine. The compensation had come first, a substantial settlement that acknowledged years of wrongful termination and damaged reputation. Isaiah had immediately established the community center's foundation, ensuring others would have resources he'd been denied. A young woman approached them, clipboard in hand. Mr. Boone, the housing rights workshop starts in 15 minutes. We've got 30 people signed up already. Isaiah checked his watch. I'll be right there, Maria. He turned to Evelyn. You staying for this one? Wouldn't miss it. Evelyn squeezed his arm. Still remember when you used to give me the same safety lectures about my old classroom. Their relationship had healed gradually, like a long-set bone finally aligning. The anger and guilt hadn't vanished, but they'd learned to carry it together, making room for new memories alongside the old pain. Inside the center, the meeting room filled quickly. Isaiah recognized faces from the streets, people he'd shared cardboard and conversations with during his years of invisibility. Now they sat in proper chairs, received genuine help, spoke without fear of being silenced. Morning, everyone, Isaiah began, his voice carrying the same quiet authority it had held during his inspector days. Today, we're talking about your rights as tenants, about safety codes and violation reporting, about making sure what happened before doesn't happen again. The session moved smoothly, people asking questions, taking notes, sharing experiences. Through the window, Isaiah could see the spot where he'd once been threatened with arrest for existing. Now it was marked by a small plaza with benches and a plaque commemorating those lost to negligence and greed. During a break, Maya Bennett slipped into the room, legal folders tucked under her arm. She'd become a regular presence, helping navigate the complex aftermath of justice. Just got word, she said quietly to Isaiah. 3 more developers came forward. They're willing to testify about similar schemes in other cities. This could go national. Isaiah absorbed the news calmly. How many buildings? Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Maya shook her head. You started something bigger than anyone expected. We all did, Isaiah corrected, including everyone in the room with his gesture. Truth needs witnesses. The morning continued with more workshops, more conversations, more small steps toward lasting change. Isaiah moved through it all with steady purpose, no longer haunted by the weight of unspoken truth. Around noon, Judge Price stopped by, as he often did. He stood with Isaiah near the entrance, watching the community in action. Remember what you said that morning? The judge asked. About having nowhere else to go? Isaiah nodded. Look at them now, Price gestured to the busy center. They all have somewhere to go. Because you stayed. Because you spoke up again. Through the windows, they could see new construction across the street. Not luxury condos or expensive shops, but affordable housing built to proper safety codes, inspected by honest eyes, documented with transparent records. A group of city council members arrived for the afternoon session on policy reform. They greeted Isaiah with genuine respect, not the hesitant acknowledgement of guilt, but the earned recognition of his expertise and integrity. Mr. Boone, one council member said. We've reviewed your original proposals from 20 years ago. Would you be willing to help us implement them properly this time? That's why we're here, Isaiah replied, leading them toward the conference room. Evelyn watched from nearby, pride evident in her expression. She remembered the brother who disappeared into shame and survival. Now she saw him restored, not just to his former self, but to something stronger, tempered by adversity into unshakable purpose. The afternoon sun cast Isaiah's shadow long across the sidewalk, not the shadow of someone trying to vanish, but of someone standing firmly in his truth. Where he had once been told to disappear, he now helped others become visible. Where he had once been silenced, he now amplified voices that needed to be heard. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.